A cold morning breeze drifted across the landscape, bringing with it an icy touch and a harsh smell of spilled blood that had long since dried. Elias Ward tugged at his horse's reins, his pale gray eyes narrowing as he spotted the wooden entrance to the cabin he'd inherited. For an instant, he wondered if his vision was playing tricks on him. 5 women dangled from ropes, hanging like dark omens directly before the entrance. Their torn clothing moved with the wind, hair covering their faces, naked feet swaying to an invisible rhythm of death. Each had a crude wooden placard nailed to her chest. The words had been carved deep into the wood with a blade, now visible in the morning's pale light. This land don't belong to you. What Morrison owns stays Morrison's forever. Elias's knuckles whitened as he gripped the leather straps, his mouth going dry. Uncle Jeremiah had willed him this property, a shot at starting over after years of bloody conflict. Instead of finding the comfort of a frontier home, he discovered 5 motionless forms hanging like a devastating blow to his core. His mount whinnied nervously, shifting beneath him. Elias dismounted, his feet hitting the hard earth with a thud. Moving closer, his work-worn hand shook as he pressed it against one woman's throat. A weak heartbeat answered back, then another. Life still flickered in that frozen air, and something ignited deep within Elias's soul. This wasn't simply about claiming property anymore. This was a violent declaration from forces seeking to consume every acre around here. Choosing to slice through those ropes meant he'd be walking directly into a tempest destined to destroy everything it touched, even if it claimed his very existence. Thank you for allowing me to tell you this tale tonight. Please let us know your location as you listen, wherever you may be. I wish you safety, and may joy always discover its way to your door. The sharp edge in Elias's grip flashed as it severed the initial rope. The woman's slack form fell, but he managed to catch her before she hit the ground. Her throat showed the furious red impression of the noose, her breathing barely perceptible, yet present. Without hesitation, Elias continued to the next victim, slicing each rope and carefully lowering all 5 to the earth. They rested in a line before the cabin's entrance, their forms frozen from the night's chill, though a few eyelids trembled, suspended between agony and unconsciousness. He reversed the blade and started cutting their hand and ankle restraints. His fingers quivered as he witnessed the bruising, flesh-beaten and discolored. Whip marks crossed like some merciless judgment carved into their skin. Whoever orchestrated this intended for them to perish slowly, to suffer greatly, and most significantly, to serve as a deterrent to anyone reckless enough to step onto this territory. One after another, he pulled them beneath the cabin's front shelter. The interior was completely dark, dust as heavy as morning fog, but there was adequate space for 5 wounded souls to rest. Elias kindled a flame. The dancing amber light gradually revealed their features. The first, dark hair, keen eyes, even while delirious. A cut on her face revealed a warrior who had fought until her final moment. The second, crimson hair, parched lips, but her bearing remained proud and rebellious. The third, slight build, golden locks, a kind face that maintained dignity despite her ordeal. The fourth, eyes black as the night sky, half open but calculating, wrapped in enigma. The final one, mature brown hair, a peaceful aura like that of a mother shielding the rest. Elias didn't need to inquire. He understood they hadn't been suspended there randomly. They were selected deliberately, and whoever orchestrated it wanted that message crystal clear. Beyond the walls, wind screamed, carrying the sharp scent of rope and lingering traces of burnt powder. Elias positioned himself against the cabin door, his rifle across his knees. The flame's glow reflected in his worn gray eyes, summoning memories of battles he'd sworn were finished. Yet the frontier never allows a man to choose tranquility so simply. Uncle Jeremiah always said, "Property isn't purchased with coins alone. It must be defended with sacrifice." Now that reality stood undeniable before the cabin entrance in the shape of 5 shivering forms. In that profound quiet, Elias comprehended there could be no retreat. Saving them meant confronting the type, gave of men who would hang women like banners at an entrance. Abandoning them would strip away his humanity. A harsh cough broke the stillness. The dark-haired woman's eyes opened first, flames dancing in the darkness. Her neck bore deep crimson bruises, her voice damaged and fractured. Yet it emerged like an order. "Don't abandon us here." Gilius knelt nearby, carefully trickling water from his container into her dried mouth. She drank as though consuming life itself along with all the hopelessness it contained. Once her breathing stabilized, she sat upright, her stare sharp as steel slicing right through him. "Do you understand you're marching directly into a hurricane?" Before Elias could respond, additional moans filled the cabin. The red-headed woman forced herself upright, rage blazing in her intense blue eyes. The blonde awakened, exhausted, but her fingers gripped Elias's shirt, desperate for something, anything to grasp. The older woman moved quietly, assisting each of them, her calm presence confirming what Elias already sensed. She had been their anchor through torment. The cabin filled with labored breathing and the gentle crackling of flames. Elias offered more water, distributed pieces of stale bread. Few words were spoken, but their gazes all conveyed the same sentiment, weariness and a test of faith. Finally, the brown-haired woman spoke. Her tone was quiet, steady, and represented them all. "We didn't suspend ourselves at that entrance. That was a declaration from the man who controls this town now. He wants anyone arriving here to witness the consequences." Elias's fist clenched, knuckles turning white. He had suspected this, but hearing it spoken made his blood surge with anger. The redhead released a bitter laugh, filled with fury and caution. "If you possess any wisdom, you'll climb back on that horse and ride far from here. We're as good as dead. If you shelter us, you'll perish alongside us." Elias looked up, his silver-gray eyes examining each face before he spoke, voice quiet and determined. "I severed those ropes. From that instant forward, your destiny became mine as well." In the firelight, the dark-haired woman pushed herself upright. Her lips formed a weary, defiant smile. "Then listen carefully, landowner. You didn't simply inherit a cabin. You just inherited a conflict." Her words fell like gunshots in the darkness. Elias knew from that moment forward, peace was no longer an option. The path ahead wouldn't involve planting crops or raising livestock. It would be about bloodshed and the shadows drawing closer, deaths around them. That evening, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across scarred faces. After water and improvised bandages, the women slowly began to recover. They remained weak, but their eyes burned not with terror, but with the flame of those who had journeyed through damnation and endured. The older woman, Grace, was first to speak. Her voice was calm and profound, each word seeming etched in blood. "The man who strung us up at the entrance is Morrison from town. He's a respected judge, but beneath that black robe, he's a human trafficker. He purchases people, falsifies documents, transforms women into possessions. We resisted, and this was our punishment." Elias ground his teeth, veins standing out across his neck. The name Morrison resonated from old war tales like the stench of death wrapped in human skin. Ruby redhead, straightened, her eyes blazing with rage. "He burned my home to ash, then attempted to force me to sign debt contracts. I refused. That night, I was dragged away to the sound of my little sister's screams. I vowed I would watch him bleed. Sodi, the blonde girl, trembled as she clutched a worn cloth in her hands. I only wanted a peaceful existence on our small farm. He accused my father of stealing horses, then took me as payment. My father took his own life the following day. I have nowhere left to turn. The firelight danced in the dark eyes of Violet, the most silent of the five. She lowered a small leather bag to the floor. Inside, papers, property deeds, false seals, contracts, and maps, evidence. We don't just bear scars. We carry proof. He believed hanging us would bury everything, but as you can see, we're still breathing. The room became silent, except for the wind whistling through gaps in the planks. Elias studied each face. Grace, solid as granite. Ruby, burning with intensity. Sodi, shaken but still clinging on. Violet, quiet and razor-sharp. Care and Clarabelle, the black-haired one, silent as ember about to ignite. Clarabelle leaned toward Elias, her eyes glowing in the firelight. You believed you came here to claim a cabin. But this territory, this is a war zone, and Morrison doesn't permit neutrality. You cut us down. That means you picked a side. Elias remained silent. He simply reached forward, adding another piece of wood to the fire. The sparks jumped upward, illuminating the worn, weathered face of a frontier man. In that silence, he knew one thing with certainty. His past had finally found him, and fate had linked him to these 5 women in a battle that was no longer theirs. Alone, thank you for being present. If this tale awakens something within you, memories of dusty evenings, the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your soul, consider subscribing to my channel. So each day we can gather once more and I'll share another story from the West. The following morning, the valley was shrouded in dense, heavy mist. Elias sat on the porch steps, clutching a hot cup of coffee, his rifle resting nearby. He could detect every faint breath from inside the cabin, every small movement from the women who had just escaped the hangman's noose. But that delicate moment of tranquility didn't endure. In the distance, hoofbeats resonated. Initially scattered, then quicker, thundering like battle drums. He set down the cup, eyes focusing on the dusty red path that led into the meadows. The fog started to clear, revealing 3 dark horses. They halted atop a hill, silently observing the cabin. The man in front wore a lengthy coat, broad-shouldered and erect in his saddle. Even from afar, Elias could see how the man's hand rested on his revolver's handle, calm as if human life was merely another statistic. Clarabelle emerged onto the porch, her black hair tangled, still concealing the rope-marked side of her face. She gazed out and whispered, voice cold as winter, "It's Morrison. He knows we survived." Ruby rushed to the window, fury illuminating her face. "I knew it. He won't let us escape. That pack of scavengers will destroy us if they get the opportunity." Sodi clutched Grace's hand tightly, trembling, while Violet stood motionless and quiet, her eyes hard as polished granite. Elias looked at them, then slowly stood and reached for his rifle. He didn't need to speak. The decision was already written in the steel of his gaze. Hoofbeats again. Sita, not just 3 now. Dozens. One by one, riders emerged from the tree line, joining the formation. Torchlight blazed through the mist as they spread out, slowly encircling the cabin like predators closing in on their quarry. Grace gripped Il's arm. Her voice shook, but her words were firm. "You still have an escape route. We don't. Leave now, and you might survive." Elias shook his head gently. He placed his calloused hand on his rifle's stock, voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. "I made my choice last night. This is my property now, and it's our stronghold." Clarabelle looked at him, green eyes blazing in the fading firelight. She stepped closer and handed Ilias a worn dagger, its blade dulled with age. "If you're going to stand with us, then understand this. This is no longer about inheritance. This is warfare." Outside, a horse neighed loudly and wildly. Dust swirled as Morrison's gang descended the slope while the fog gave way to the bloodthirsty faces of armed men. The old cabin had transformed into a fortress, and every breath inside was preparing for a night of flames and fury. Darkness fell more quickly than usual. Shadow consumed the valley completely, with only the flickering torchlight of Morrison's men piercing the gloom. More than 20 gunmen stood shoulder to shoulder, their laughter loud and vicious. Horses snorted and pawed the earth like they already tasted triumph. Inside the cabin, Ilias checked the ammunition in his rifle, each round clicking into position with a dry metallic sound. He looked over at the 5 women. The rope marks still scarred their skin, but their eyes blazed with fire. He handed Ruby an old revolver, gave Soddy a shortened shotgun, slipped Violet a hunting blade and a small pistol tucked into her sleeve. Grace clutched a weathered musket while Clarabelle gripped a Navy Colt like it was part of her limb. "We're not just fighting to survive," Ilias said, his voice low and steady. "We're fighting to end their executioner's game forever." Outside, Morrison rode forward, his voice echoing. "Hand them over. That cabin ain't yours, Ward. You cut them loose yesterday, and you signed your death warrant today." Ilias stepped onto the porch, voice hoarse but unshakable. "This land belonged to Jeremiah, and now it's mine. If you want it, you'll have to go through me." Before the words had finished, a gunshot cracked the night. A bullet splintered the wooden gatepost. The wolves charged like a flood. Ilias ducked back inside and slammed the door shut. Gunfire exploded. Windows shattered. Ruby screamed and fired, the shot tearing through a man scrambling onto the porch. Soddy, trembling with eyes shut tight, pulled the trigger on the shotgun. The blast blew the door apart, dropping 2 men in a crimson spray. Violet waited in silence, hidden in the shadows. She struck, knife flashing into a raider's throat as he slipped inside. He thrashed, then dropped to the floor, eyes wide in shock. Grace pulled Soddy back, then lit a jar of kerosene and hurled it out the window. Flames roared up, halting the charge of the horses. Morrison barked orders, his men fanning out and firing blindly. Bullets ripped through the walls, gunsmoke thick, key in the air, wooden fragments flying like blades. Ilias dropped low, calmly working the rifle's lever. One shot, one rider falling dot in the chaos. Clarabelle rushed to Elias's side, firing 2 shots. The smoke curled around her face, her green eyes lit with fury and pride in the firelight. Screams, gunshots, and horse cries blended into a symphony of hell. Jeremiah's old cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a burning fortress where 1 man and 5 women turned fear into their final strength. The air was thick with gunsmoke. The thunder of hooves and the cries of dying men were fading. Bodies of horses and riders lay scattered across the field while the fire from Grace's oil jar still burned bright, casting a bloody glow across the cabin's wooden walls and through the haze and flame. Morrison appeared tall, his black coat billowing, silver revolver gleaming in his hand. He walked forward with steady, deliberate steps, eyes cold as forged steel. When only a few yards remained, he stopped. His voice rang out like a church bell. "Ward, you think you saved them. All you've done is dig a bigger grave for them and for yourself. Around here, the law is what I say it is." Ilias pushed himself up, his shoulder bleeding from a grazing shot, but his silver-gray eyes gleamed like a drawn blade. He stepped onto the porch, the weight of the rifle heavy in his hand. Behind him, The 5 women stood tall, using the last of their strength to keep from falling. Clarabelle stepped forward, green eyes locked onto Morrison. She pulled a crumpled stack of papers from her coat, her voice clear and defiant. "You call that law. This is the truth. Forged debt contracts, fake seals, a list of every judge and sheriff you bought and paid for." Morrison hesitated, sneering, his voice dripping with scorn. "Paper won't save you when I'm still holding the gun." From the shadows, Violet stepped out, raising a silver locket. Firelight danced across its intricate engravings. "Remember this, Morrison. It belonged to Margaret, your wife. She's still alive, and she told us everything. How you faked your death to steal her father's gold mine. How every woman who stood against you disappeared." This time Morrison's face paled. He snapped, voice sharp as a whip. "Lies. That woman died 5 years ago." Grace stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "We met her in Denver just 3 weeks ago. She signed a sworn statement, and the marshal has it now. There's nowhere left to run, Morrison." Morrison's face twitched, fear flashing for a moment, then drowned beneath fury. He let out a roar and raised his pistol at Clarabel. In that instant, time froze. Elias moved on instinct. He shoved Clarabelle aside and raised the rifle. 2 shots rang out loud as thunder, tearing the valley apart. Morrison staggered Elias's bullet, driving deep into his shoulder, knocking the gun from his hand. Ruby stormed forward, her blue eyes blazing. "Your time is up, Morrison. From this day on, it's you who will hang." In the flickering firelight, Morrison fell to his knees, hatred burning in his eyes. In the distance, hoofbeats echoed once more, but this time it wasn't his men. The marshal's riders were coming, badges shining in the moonlight. Elias lowered the rifle, breath heavy. He knew the war might not be over yet, but the tide had turned. Morrison was no longer a powerful judge. He was just another trembling criminal, finally face to face with the justice he had long denied. The moon hung high, casting silver light across a valley still thick with the smell of gunpowder. Morrison was dragged away, his hands bound tight, his twisted face frozen in powerless rage. The few henchmen who had survived lowered their heads, unable to meet the eyes of Elias or the 5 women they had once strung up like warnings. Marshal Thompson stepped forward, silver beard, eyes sharp as whetted steel. He gave Elias a solemn nod, then turned to Grace, Clarabelle, Ruby, Sodie, and Violet. "Justice may come late, but it comes. You did what no court dared to do. You survived, and you testified." Clarabelle raised her head, black hair falling over the rope mark on her cheek. Her voice was quiet but solid as stone. "We didn't survive by luck. We survived because he cut the rope." All eyes turned to Elias. He stood still, blood seeping through his shirt, face weathered in the fire's dying light. He said nothing, just bowed his head. He had never expected to find meaning in a piece of inherited land. But now the cabin was no longer a refuge for a lonely man. It had become the stronghold of justice, held up by trembling hands that refused to yield. 3 days later, when the town had settled, Elias rebuilt the cabin gate. The rope that once threatened life had turned to ash. Together, he and the 5 women hammered boards, raised walls. Piece by piece, with every nail driven in, they were not just building a house. They were shaping a family born from the frontier. Sodie replanted the little garden out front, her hands frail but determined. Ruby took charge of the horses, her fiery eyes shining as she watched them run. Violet spent hours sorting documents, preparing evidence to send to the courts. Grace kept books, her voice stern, yet warm like a mother guiding the rest. Clarabelle, she stood beside Elias each evening, her green eyes catching the last rays of sunset. A fire that refused to die. One night by the fire, Elias looked around at them. His voice was quiet but strong like a log splitting in the hearth. Some ropes are made to kill, but when you find the courage to cut them, they become the ties that bind. I thought I inherited a cabin, but the truth is, I inherited all of you. No one answered. Only Clarabelle placed her hand gently on his, her eyes glowing in the dark. And in that moment Elias understood this wild land may be full of smoke and betrayal, but it is also the place where, through ashes and blood, people find trust again, freedom again, and family. The little cabin stood beneath the moonlight, no longer a symbol of Morrison's cruelty, but a fortress raised by those who dared to stand, tall against the dark dot, my friend. Out here in the West, land can change hands, guns can change owners, but justice belongs to those who never turn their back on one another. And sometimes the most valuable thing we inherit is the chance to become someone better. I hope you live with joy and peace in your heart. That is all I ever want from you. I love you. It has truly been an honor to share this story with you tonight. Tell me what you thought. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next gripping tale from the Wild West.